The night slowly draped itself across the skyline of Night City like a worn, glittering shawl, the last warmth of the day fading into a metallic chill that clung to concrete and neon alike. In the alleys of Kabuki, behind the teeming market stalls now shuttered for the evening, a single figure leaned against the side of a battered vending machine, waiting. Lana Halprin, small-time tech scavenger, exhaled slowly, watching her breath mist into the air. The street lamps buzzed overhead, casting long, crooked shadows across the broken pavement. Somewhere deeper in the maze of streets, an engine revved, a gang car maybe, or just another sleepless joyrider. And then she was swallowed by the endless hum of the city. The vending machine's screen flickered, desperate for attention. Real fruit! Taste the future! Lana ignored it. She was more interested in the low whirring from a nearby manhole, the faint traces of ozone riding the air. The underground system beneath Kabuki were alive tonight, the waterworks pulsing and breathing just as the streets did. The scent here was a dense, almost tangible mixture: oil, dust, street food residue, and the faint, sterile sting of disinfectant sprayed earlier by city workers. It was a cocktail that Lana had known for years, each layer of smell telling her whether the night ahead would be calm or not. A few meters down the street, an old man swept the front step of a noodle shop with patient, deliberate motions. The bristles of his broom rasped over the concrete, a soft, steady rhythm that filled the quiet between distant sirens, and the murmur of conversation from an open bar door across the way. He didn't look up as Lana passed him. Few did. In Night City, being unseen was often safer than acknowledgement. She tightened the strap on her satchel, the rough canvas worn thin at the edges. Inside, small victories gleamed: salvaged wiring, a cracked cyberdeck, a few glistening memory shards she hoped to sell come morning. Nothing flashy, nothing dangerous, just enough to stay afloat in a city that ate the unwary. Above, a holo ad flickered to life, the giant smiling face of some corpo mascot frozen for a second mid-laugh, before the image resolved into a clean, too-perfect scene of family bliss. The rain started a moment later, gentle at first, soft pinpricks against the city's battered skin. Lana turned up the collar of her jacket, the worn synthetic leather creaking softly, and moved toward the nearest underpass. The rain brought a kind of temporary peace, washing the streets clean of blood, dirt, and yesterday's sins, even if just for a few hours. She liked this time of night best, before the real predators came out, before the corpos sealed another deal behind polished glass towers, before the endless grind of surviving in Night City began again at sunrise. Near the overpass, an old synth player, maybe 70, maybe more, plucks a slow, aching tune from an instrument that looks patched together from scrap and longing. His voice, when he sang, cracked like the sidewalks beneath Lana's feet. No one stopped to listen, but the song drifted anyway, weaving itself between raindrops, traffic, and neon reflections in puddles. A young woman in a cheap imitation of a corpo suit hurried past, clutching a crumpled briefcase close to her chest. Behind her, a group of teenagers in scavenged tech armor laughed too loud, their voices sharp against the soft curtain of rain. Life here was always too fast, too frantic, but in these quiet cracks between heartbeats, Night City revealed itself. A place stitched together by desperation, dreams, and the raw machinery of survival. Lana slipped into the underpass. The concrete walls were layered in old tags and peeling propaganda posters, some so ancient that their slogans had lost meaning. Believe in the new dawn, one read. The letters faded to near invisibility. She didn't believe in much, not anymore, but there was still something beautiful in the way the old and the new collided here, rusted metal against flickering neon, the past's broken promises lighting the way forward. The smell changed under the overpass, wetter, cooler, tinged with mildew. The echoes of distant traffic grew hollow here, like whispers from a deeper time. Lana settled into the shadows, pulling out a small shard from her pocket, tracing its etched patterns with her thumb. Somewhere inside it, someone's memories waited, a life lived, a story recorded. She wondered briefly what it would be like to live inside one of those memories, instead of her own. Her eyes grew heavy as she listened to the rain thicken, pooling against the gutter drains, washing over the streets in small silver rivers. Somewhere deep within the city's bones, an old transformer groaned, electricity rippling across forgotten lines. Night City was ancient in its way, younger than many places, yet already carrying the heavy, tangled weight of history across its chromium shoulders. Wars fought not with armies, but with contracts and hacks. Revolutions born and smothered in corporate boardrooms. Dreams sold wholesale to the highest bidder. In the wet, humming darkness of Kabuki, Lana closed her eyes for a moment. Not to sleep. There was no real sleep for the streetwise in Night City, but to listen, to feel the pulse of a place that had been built, broken, rebuilt again. Always at the edge of collapse, always striving towards something just out of reach. And so, in this quiet pocket of time, the story of Night City could be felt, if not fully known. A city of endless tomorrows and endless regrets. The rain softened for a moment, a lull that felt like a breath held in the night's lungs. Somewhere far away, a train howled across old rails. And Lana stood, pocketing the memory shard, stepping back into the half-lit world. The story of Night City was not born in the neon, or the blood, or the dreams of its people. It was written long before, in the ashes of the world that had come before. It is there that our journey begins. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the city wrapped in a thick, heavy mist that clung to the streets, like an old secret. Up on the edges of North Oak, where the land still pretended it was part of something natural, an old man sat on the crumbling stone wall of a forgotten park. His name was Ellis Cord. Nobody remembered much about him, just another face in a city teeming with stories, but he remembered plenty. In his weathered hands he turned a battered old lighter over and over, thumbing the etched logo on its side, Petrochem, fueling tomorrow. The world had been different once, simpler maybe, but maybe not. Across the city, the early haze muffled the roar of distant cars and softened the sharp edges of the skyline. Ellis leaned back against the wall, feeling the cold bite of damp stone through the worn fabric of his jacket. He watched as a drone buzzed overhead, carrying someone's breakfast across corporate airspace. No one noticed. No one looked up anymore. Night City's story didn't begin here, among the towers and markets and broken dreams. It began decades earlier, far from these streets, when the old world, the world of governments, of nations, of slow, ponderous power, started to tear itself apart. The collapse wasn't sudden. It came in small fractures at first. Economic crashes, oil shortages, wars fought over dwindling resources. The United States, once proud and whole, was gutted from within, hollowed by corruption, battered by ecological disasters, sold piece by piece to the corporations that promised stability when no one else could. Ellis remembered the headlines. He remembered the panic in the eyes of men who once thought themselves untouchable. Climate change wasn't some far-off threat then. It was everywhere. Crops failed. Rivers dried. Cities burned. Somewhere in those years, the future changed shape, narrowing into something harder, meaner, and far more expensive. He flicked the lighter open and closed, a nervous tick he had carried since the long winter, that brutal stretch of famine and blackouts, when whole cities vanished under the weight of hunger and cold. Families camped in office towers. Militias ruled the suburbs. Corporations built private armies to protect their assets, while governments begged for bailouts they would never receive. Petrochem Arasaka, Militech, Biotechnica. Ellis knew their names like old songs. Back then, they didn't just sell products. They sold survival. You needed clean water, a place to live, security. You paid them, or you paid the price. The last president of the old United States, Rosalind Myers, had been a different kind of leader. When the federal government fell into chaos, she made a choice: declare martial law, restructure the government under the guise of emergency powers, and cling to the illusion of order. The birth of the new United States wasn't a revolution. It was a scar, a stitching together of the wounded remains of a country no longer whole. And on the West Coast, far from the gilded promises of the East, a different idea began to take root. Ellis remembered the old news feeds, showing a man named Richard Knight, visionary, dreamer, idealist. He came not with guns, but with blueprints, plans for a new city, a city free of the chaos swallowing the world, a place where technology and ambition could build a shining future. Corpos loved the sound of it. They funded Knight's dream with open checkbooks and closed intentions. And so, Night City was born, not as salvation, but as investment. Ellis laughed softly to himself, a dry, rasping sound. He wondered sometimes if Richard Knight had realized it, even in those first days when the foundation stones were laid. If he knew he was building a cage instead of a sanctuary. The mist thickened, softening the skyline into a watercolour blur of jagged towers and blinking lights. Somewhere nearby, a street vendor set up a small stand, the smell of frying oil cutting through the damp air. Life, stubborn and unrelenting, pushed forward in 100 tiny ways. Richard Knight's dream didn't survive him. He was murdered before the city was even finished. The work of organised crime, or angry corporations, or simply the natural order of a world that devoured its visionaries. No one could agree who pulled the trigger. Few even cared anymore. After Knight's death, the city changed. It stopped pretending to be a utopia. Control slipped through a dozen bloody hands. Gangs, megacorps, politicians for hire, each carving out their piece of the carcass. The fourth corporate war came later, burning like wildfire across oceans and continents alike. Megacorporations waged open battle with mercenaries, black ops teams, and killer satellites. Cities collapsed into ash. Information networks shattered. Nuclear weapons scarred the land. Night City survived, but only barely. It became a city of refugees and fixers, mercs and dreamers, clawing out lives atop the ruins. The old United States offered protection, but it was a hollow offer. Night City declared itself independent, not out of strength, but because it had no choice. Ellis closed the lighter and slipped it into his pocket. His fingers trembled slightly. Too much cold. Too many old memories. He pulled his jacket tighter and watched as the fog began to lift, peeling away from the streets like an old bandage. The corporations returned, of course. They always did. Money had a way of finding its way back to the flames. Arasaka rebuilt its towers. Militech tightened its grip. New players rose from the ashes. Kangtao, Zetatech, Netwatch. But the city had changed in ways even they couldn't fully control. The people here, Ellis thought, were different now. Harder, canny, distrustful of promises. They had seen what dreams cost and what survival demanded. They lived not for tomorrow, but for tonight, for the small victories won, one at a time. And still, despite it all, hope flickered between the cracks, in the laughter of children darting through alleys, in the sharp-eyed baristas serving coffee in reclaimed shipping containers, in the nameless street, artists painting rebellion onto concrete walls. Ellis shifted on the wall, feeling the stiffness in his knees. A hovercar hummed past overhead, stirring the mist into lazy spirals. Somewhere, a distant explosion echoed, small, contained. Probably just a car bomb. Life in Night City barely flinched at such things. The city had survived everything thrown at it. It would survive what came next. He pushed off the wall and started walking toward the heart of the city, where the mist gave way to the bright pulse of neon, and the ground shook faintly with the weight of countless lives moving forward. Night City wasn't built to last, but somehow it endured anyway. As the sun struggled higher, burning away the last tatters of fog, the true face of Night City emerged from the mist. A vast, breathing patchwork of districts, each with its own rhythm, its own scars, and its own stubborn heart. In the quiet moments between the chaos, you could glimpse them, the distinct worlds within the city's embrace. It is there we turn our gaze next. The mist, now dissolved under the rising sun, left the streets gleaming with thin films of water that caught the neon and bent it into wavering pools of colour. Night City was awake now, fully, loudly, and without apology. Down on the cracked avenues of Watson, a boy named Mateo Alvarez tightened the laces of his battered sneakers, crouched at the edge of a market that was only half set up. The vendors were late today. Maybe trouble overnight, maybe the rain, or maybe just the slow bleed of the city's ordinary exhaustion. Watson was a place of layers. Once a booming corporate hub, it had fallen into ruin after the Fourth Corporate War, and never truly recovered. Mateo had never seen it as anything but what it was now. A crowded, chaotic jumble of sweat, smoke, and the low thrumming of 1,000 hungry dreams. The street smelled of damp cardboard, grilled meat, and the faint, sweet decay of uncollected trash. Colours clashed violently. Graffiti battling corporate logos, handmade neon signs flickering above open-air noodle stalls. An old woman swept the front of her shop with a bamboo broom. The rhythmic swish, swish, steady against the rumbling of nearby delivery drones. Overhead, the skeletal remains of half-finished corporate towers loomed, their glassless windows staring like blind eyes across the sprawling markets of Kabuki below. Mateo wiped a smudge from his cheek and darted between the carts, unnoticed. just another small body among many. In Watson, no one had time to watch anyone else too closely, not unless they had a reason. A few miles to the south, the city changed. Westbrook rose into the sky like an illusion, pristine, glittering, insulated. It was a place where money built walls and filled them with artificial beauty. In Japantown, the streets buzzed with the carefully managed chaos of endless festivals and scripted nightlife. Lanterns bobbed in the breeze, throwing fractured light across the slick roads. On a narrow balcony above one of Japantown's many side streets, a woman in a silk robe smoked a long, thin cigarette, watching the scene below with lidded eyes. Her name was Misaki Ito, and she had once been someone important. Now she was a quiet observer of the world she had helped shape. A ghost moving through the lacquered hallways of the district's glittering facade. The scent of incense drifted upward from a nearby temple, clashing gently with the smell of synthetic cherry blossoms piped through hidden vents. Every detail here was crafted, every sound, every surface, built to conjure a vision of tradition that had long since been sold and repackaged. Misaki stubbed out her cigarette, the ash spiralling down to join the city's endless dust. Farther west still, the city's polished mask cracked. Haywood sprawled wide and low, a patchwork of hard-scrabble neighbourhoods and simmering pride. It was the city's soul in many ways, beating strong and defiant beneath layers of poverty and resilience. Here, family meant something still. A bond forged in small kitchens, in back alleys, in the fierce protection of one's own. On a sun-baked basketball court littered with empty cans and forgotten hopes, two teenagers played a half-hearted game, under the wary gaze of an old fixer leaning against a chain-link fence. His name was Nico Santos. Everyone knew Nico, or knew of him. A man who could find things, arrange things, solve problems. The ball thudded against the cracked concrete. The sound hollow, but the laughter that followed was real enough. The smell of grilled elote drifted from a street vendor's cart nearby, mixing with the sharp, metallic tang of ozone that hinted at another approaching storm. Even in moments like these, when life felt almost normal, the air carried a tension, an awareness that the peace here was fragile, bought daily with grit and vigilance. To the south, the coast pulled the city toward Pacifica. Once intended to be a resort paradise, Pacifica now stood half-finished and half-forgotten. A graveyard of dreams sinking into the sands. The towers that rose there were hollow, windowless, their skeletal frames covered in rust and defiant murals. Among them moved the people left behind, the outcasts, the forsaken, the ones for whom Night City had never had a place. Voodoo boys patrolled the broken avenues, their presence silent but heavy, watching the tourists foolish enough to drift this far south. In a narrow courtyard, where broken furniture and old tyres formed a crude barrier against the street, a boy no older than 10 chased a battered soccer ball between puddles, his laughter rising sharp and pure against the hollow silence of abandoned hotels. The sun here felt different, harsher, almost accusing. The smell was of salt, rust, and old promises never kept. Further inland, across the jagged veins of freeway and crumbling overpasses, Santo Domingo sprawled. Industrial and unglamorous, Santo Domingo was the city's engine, its forge. Here, factories belched smoke into a permanently stained sky, and the nights were lit not by neon, but by the sullen glow of smelters and processing plants. Inside one such plant, a maintenance worker named Raul Vega wiped the sweat from his brow with a grease-stained cloth. The oppressive heat pressing against his skin like a second, heavier layer. The roar of machinery was constant, a throbbing background noise that shook the very air. The scent here was of molten metal, oil, and human exhaustion. Raoul moved carefully, checking the lines, the gauges, the pulse of the plant. A small miscalculation here could mean disaster, but there was no pride in it, only necessity. In Santo Domingo, survival wasn't a matter of fighting. It was a matter of enduring. Beyond the industrial labyrinth, the city's limits thinned out into the Badlands, a broken, arid wasteland stretching to the horizon, where the last echoes of Night City faded into dust and broken dreams. The nomads ruled out here, families of the road, bound not by blood, but by shared struggle and a code older than the city itself. On the cracked remains of an old interstate, a caravan of beat-up vehicles rumbled across the desert, kicking up long trails of dust that shimmered in the afternoon heat. Among them, a woman named Rosa Delgado sat behind the wheel of a battered Thornton truck, her eyes scanning the endless horizon. The desert smelled of dry earth, sun-baked rubber, and the faint, lingering memory of rain, long since past. Out here, the rules were different. Trust had to be earned. Supplies were precious. Time moved slower, heavier, shaped by the brutal honesty of the land. Rosa tapped the dashboard lightly, a quiet habit born from a lifetime of coaxing stubborn machines to life. Somewhere beyond the hills, the lights of Night City would start to flicker against the darkening sky. In the city's heart, the pulse was strongest. City centre, rebuilt after the ravages of the Fourth Corporate War, gleamed like a new crown atop a battered corpse. The towers here stretched impossibly high, sheer walls of glass and steel that reflected not the sky, but the city itself. Fractured, brilliant, and unknowable. Inside one such tower, a young corpo named Elias Trent adjusted the knot of his synthetic silk tie, his reflection staring back at him from the darkened window. Far below, the streets throbbed with life he would never touch. His world was boardrooms, data pads, whispered deals sealed over expensive whiskey. The air here smelled of filtered perfection, recycled air scrubbed clean of the city's filth, perfumed subtly with scents designed to inspire trust, ambition, hunger. Elias placed a hand against the glass, feeling none of the street's heartbeat through the polished surface. From this height, the chaos below was abstract, beautiful, a living map of ambition and decay. Night City was a machine, and each district a gear grinding against the others, struggling for some semblance of forward motion. Mateo darting through Watson's market stalls, Misaki watching the orchestrated dances of Japantown, Nico guarding the pride of Haywood's battered courts, the boy chasing dreams in Pacifica's ruins, Raoul enduring the endless churn of Santo Domingo, Rosa charting the wide broken roads of the Badlands, Elias peering down from city centre's gilded heights. All of them, parts of a living wounded whole. Night City was not one place. It was 1,000 different worlds, stitched together by desperation, ambition, and something deeper, harder to name. And beneath it all, the city whispered its eternal refrain: survive, endure, dream if you dare. Between these districts, beyond the humming streets and shattered towers, forces moved unseen. Factions, gangs, corporations, and collectives, each carving their initials into the city's ever-shifting skin. To understand the soul of Night City, one must listen not just to the streets, but to the whispers that move between them. It is there we turn next. The lights shifted as afternoon settled over the city, smearing the skyline in soft golds and bruised purples. In the narrow spaces between the great towers and the crumbling streets, the true architects of Night City's survival and suffering moved, not always seen, but always felt. In an alley off Jig Jig Street, a fixer named Petra Vale waited beneath a broken neon sign, tapping ash from her cigarette onto the cracked concrete. Around her, the city pulsed. Quick glances from passing gangoons, the heavy thud of bass bleeding from a nearby club, the murmur of vendors calling out over the noise. Petra wasn't afraid. Fear was a luxury you couldn't afford in her line of work. She knew the gangs that ruled these streets, knew the factions that clawed for dominance. She had brokered deals between them, smoothed over bloodied feuds, whispered into the right ears. The signs of their presence were everywhere, woven into the fabric of the city itself. Across the street, two members of the Maelstrom gang swaggered out of a garage, the doors creaking open to reveal a low-slung vehicle modified beyond reason. Their chrome implants caught the fading light, grotesque, jagged, deliberate. Maelstrom wore their cyberware like armour, their humanity traded away piece by piece, until only machinery and madness remained. Petra watched them go without comment. Maelstrom wasn't just dangerous because of their firepower. It was the unpredictability, the way they blurred the line between man and machine, sanity and chaos. They worshipped technology, not as a tool, but as an end in itself. Further down the street, in the cooling shadow of a half-collapsed parking structure, a group of tiger claws lounged like big cats at rest, sleek, deadly, patient. Their motorcycles lined the curb in a neat row, engines still ticking with heat, tattoos curled up their necks and across their knuckles, silent warnings written in ink and blood. The tiger claws ruled Japantown and its surroundings with a mix of ruthless efficiency and brutal tradition. They believed in respect, but not mercy. Petra had seen them settle disputes with a single flash of steel. A whispered apology offered only to the dead. The city shifted again, a slow turning of the wheel, and Petra flicked her cigarette away. High above her, beyond the reach of the street-level wars, the corpos played their own games. Games bloodier and colder than any gang feud. Arasaka, the ancient titan, moved like a glacier through Night City's veins. It whispered promises of security, while sharpening knives in the dark. Petra had brokered deals with Arasaka too, carefully, always carefully. They were not like the street gangs, wild and impulsive. They were precise, calculating. When they moved against you, it was not with a shout or a gunshot, but with a document, a signature, a quiet disappearance. They built loyalty the way an architect built a prison, brick by careful brick. Farther west, in the industrial jungles of Santo Domingo, the 6th Street Gang roamed like restless ghosts. Born from the fractured remains of a forgotten military unit, they wrapped themselves in the faded patriotism of a dead America, clinging to the symbols of a country that no longer truly existed. Petra had no patience for 6th Street's empty bravado, but she respected their organization. They were disciplined in their way, veterans hardened by loss, driven by a stubborn refusal to be forgotten. Somewhere closer, the Valentinos prepared for a holy day. In Haywood, the streets were strung with colourful banners, candles guttered in windows, and music spilled from open doors. The Valentinos weren't just a gang. They were a culture, a brotherhood, built on blood, family, and fierce pride. Their tattoos told stories, saints and sinners alike inked across muscle and bone. Petra had sat at their tables once, shared laughter and tears over cheap beer and street tacos. She knew that beneath the bravado and the gold-plated pistols, there was something rare in the Valentinos, a loyalty that could not be bought, only earned. The city's darker corners were ruled by even stranger forces. The voodoo boys, hidden deep within Pacifica's ruins, moved not through strength of arms, but through dominance of the net. They were shamans of code, wielding black market algorithms like spells, weaving themselves into the digital bloodstream of the city. Petra had done business with them only once. It was enough. The voodoo boys did not forgive easily, nor forget. Their members moved like shadows, faces hidden behind cracked cyberware, eyes glowing faintly with the light of 1,000 stolen secrets. They whispered in Creole, built their own laws, and answered to no one outside their fractured sanctuary. And then there were the animals. Brute strength made flesh. The animals valued raw power above all. In gyms and fight clubs hidden across the city, they trained relentlessly, sculpting themselves into walking weapons. Their world was one of dominance, where the weak were trampled without a second thought. Petra had once watched an animal fighter snap a man's arm during a casual argument, not out of rage, but boredom. They thrived on chaos, lived for the rush of combat, and cared little for the politics that tangled other gangs in endless webs. Above all of them, unseen but ever present, the core reigned. Militech, Arasaka, Kang Tao. Their battles shaped the city in ways few would ever see directly. A contract here, a black ops raid there. To most of Night City, these megacorporations were gods, distant, merciless, inevitable. Petra knew better. They were no gods, just people with better armour, sharper lawyers, and deeper pockets. A scuffle broke out down the block, a street deal gone wrong maybe, or just a disagreement over turf. Petra didn't move. Violence in Night City was like weather, expected, endured. She leaned back against the wall, letting the city's noise wash over her. Each faction, each gang, each corporate entity. They all believed they could bend Night City to their will. Some tried through muscle, others through technology, others still through money or faith. But Petra understood something deeper. Night City was not owned, not truly. It moved according to its own grim logic, indifferent to the ambitions of those who called it home. The maelstroms would keep cutting away their humanity. The tiger claws would keep enforcing their bloody traditions. The Valentinos would keep praying and bleeding for their own. The voodoo boys would keep dancing at the edge of the net. The animals would keep smashing what they did not understand. And the corporations would keep playing their cold, endless games of empire. But the city itself would endure, as it always had. Not because of them, and not despite them. Because Night City had learned long ago. Survival is not about winning. It's about enduring the endless grind, the perpetual chaos, the slow, inevitable erosion of everything soft. Petra lit another cigarette and watched the twilight fall, smearing the alleys in shades of violet and steel. Somewhere far away, a siren wailed, and the city's pulse quickened for the night ahead. And within this sprawling, fractured cityscape, among its factions and ghosts, lived individuals whose choices would ripple far beyond the broken streets, figures whose small, stubborn sparks of defiance would leave their mark upon the ever-turning gears of Night City. It is time now to step closer and glimpse a few of them. The night had deepened, folding the city in layers of neon, chrome, and shadow. Somewhere in the haze, a street lamp buzzed and flickered, its light barely holding back the darkness that gathered at the edges of every alley. In the battered corner of an afterlife once known as the Afterlife, the dive bar of murk legends and whispered promises, a lone figure sat at the counter, nursing a drink that had long since gone warm. V, they called them. No last name, no lineage spoken aloud. Just V. A mercenary by trade, a survivor by necessity, V was both nothing and everything Night City could shape. Every merc job, every desperate climb up the city's fractured ladder had left its mark. Scars beneath the skin, and deeper ones hidden where no surgeon's scalpel could reach. The room around V breathed with life. The clink of glasses, the soft thud of boots on sticky floors, the distant, broken laughter of gangoons spending eddies they hadn't yet bled for. V turned the chipped glass slowly between scarred fingers, feeling the tiny cracks catch against calloused skin. Somewhere deep in their mind, the city's heartbeat pulsed, faster, louder, harder. An echo that was impossible to quiet. Memories flickered at the edge of consciousness, half formed and half feared. Not just their own, someone else's. Johnny Silverhand. If the afterlife had walls, they would have whispered his name too. A ghost who refused to die. A myth too stubborn to fade. Johnny had been many things. Rocker boy, terrorist, martyr, traitor, saviour. It all depended on who was telling the story. Long before V's time, Silverhand had played a different game. A louder, more desperate one. Guitar slung low, defiance bleeding from every pore. He had screamed into the void against the corporations he hated, and lost. Arasaka had buried him once, body and soul. But Johnny didn't stay buried. Now, in the V's mind, he lived again. A restless spectre with no patience for half measures. A voice of rage and sorrow crackling through synaptic connections like broken radio transmissions. Sometimes V saw him, not as flesh, but as flickering projections, leaning against alley walls, pacing across rooftops, tossing empty beer cans into the gutters of memory. A permanent hitchhiker, in a brain not built to carry two. Their bond was uneasy, volatile, but in some twisted way, it was also inevitable. Johnny had been born from Night City's original sin, the dream of freedom twisted into a weapon. Across town, in a small, cluttered apartment nestled above a mechanic's shop in Watson, Judy Alvarez wiped grease from her hands and frowned at the tangled mess of wires before her. Judy didn't chase headlines or carve her name into the city's broken history. Her world was quieter, smaller maybe, but no less vital. Brain dance rigs, illegal edits, memories carved and stitched into new realities. Judy was a sculptor of minds, a crafter of experiences more real than reality itself. The scent of soldered metal and synthetic plastic filled the room. Outside, rain hammered against the windows, but Judy barely noticed. Her hands moved with practiced precision, coaxing life back into a damaged BD recorder. For Judy, the city's chaos wasn't something to conquer. It was something to understand, to push back against, one life at a time. Her loyalty wasn't for sale. Her scars weren't worn like badges. They were quieter things, stitched into the soft spaces behind her words, reflected in the way she never let herself hope too easily. Somewhere beyond Judy's tiny sanctum, down in the heart of Pacifica's broken promises, Another figure moved through the ruins like a blade through silk. Placide, lieutenant of the Voodoo Boys, was a man carved from stone and silence. His presence filled rooms even when he said nothing, which was often. His words, when they came, were heavy, deliberate, weighted with the knowledge of battles fought not with guns, but with information, with control of the invisible rivers flowing through the net. In a forgotten shopping mall, Placide watched screens flicker to life, security feeds, net fragments, coded warnings scrawled in dying digital tongues. His breath misted in the damp air, heavy with the scent of mildew and the electric ozone tang of overworked processors. The city's surface games, the gunfights, the gang wars, the merc jobs, they were noise. The real power was hidden, encrypted, waiting. Placid understood that, and he would move heaven and hell to see Pacifica rise again, or at least survive what came next. Elsewhere, beneath the brutal lights of a corpo boardroom in city centre, another player shifted the balance of the city's fortunes. Saburo Arasaka. If the city itself had blood in its veins, Arasaka's fingerprints were on every droplet. Ancient, implacable, cold. Saburo had outlived wars, rivals, betrayals, and time itself. In his presence, even the most ruthless corpos felt like insects scuttling before an ancient titan. The boardroom smelled of polished mahogany, cold air conditioning, and the sterile sharpness of legal documents. Saburo sat in silence, hands folded, eyes dark and unreadable. Around him, men and women in immaculate suits presented data, charts, projections, the pulse of a world he owned and moulded at will. To them, he was a relic. To himself, he was history made flesh, and he had no intention of relinquishing the empire he had forged from war and sacrifice. In the outskirts, beyond the polished steel and shattered concrete, Panam Palmer rested against the wheel of her outrider truck, gazing up at the stars struggling to pierce the night's haze. The desert around her was vast and silent, broken only by the occasional chirr of distant insects and the low, lonely howl of wind through abandoned pylons. Panam's life had once been tethered to Night City, to promises broken and dreams stolen. Now she carved her own path among the nomads, chasing freedom across a land the city had long since forgotten. The leather of her jacket creaked as she shifted, the smell of dust and sun-baked metal rising from her clothes. She thought of the road ahead, of debts owed, friends lost, futures unwritten. Panam knew something the city dwellers often forgot. Survival wasn't about power or ambition. It was about loyalty, about fighting for the people who still stood at your side when everything else fell away. Back in the city's twisted veins, a street kid named Jackie Wells sped through the crowded lanes of Haywood, laughing loud and full, the engine of his Yaiba Kusanagi growling beneath him like a living thing. Jackie lived big, loved big, fought big, dreamed big. To him, Night City wasn't a cage. It was a challenge, a place to seize your destiny with both hands, and dare the world to stop you. The air around him smelled of burnt rubber, cheap perfume, and the sharp, metallic tang of anticipation. He grinned as he took a corner too fast, the city lights a blur around him. Jackie believed, more than most, that there was still a way to live here without losing yourself. That honour wasn't a relic. That loyalty still meant something. Not many believed that anymore. And so, through the rain-slick streets and neon corridors of Night City, these figures moved. V, haunted and resilient, Johnny burning bright and furious from beyond the grave. Judy stitching hope from broken memories. Placide plotting in silence beneath shattered dreams. Zaburo ruling with a hand of iron and a heart of stone. Panam carrying loyalty across the desert's endless scars. Jackie charging headlong into fate with a smile and a fistful of dreams, each of them a single thread in the vast, fraying tapestry of Night City. Their choices would not stop the city's endless grinding. They would not save it. Night City did not want saving, but still, they fought. Still, they lived. Still, they dreamed, because in Night City, dreams were the only thing that death couldn't steal. And all around them, shaping their bodies, their minds, their very souls, the technology of Night City wove its glittering, merciless spell, promising salvation, demanding sacrifice. Let us now turn to the pulse of chrome and code that beats within every street, every alley, every heart in Night City. In the early hours before dawn, when the city's pulse softened and even the restless traffic slowed to a distant hush, the neon glow seemed almost gentle, casting long, muted reflections across the wet asphalt. Beneath the skeletal remains of a collapsed freeway in Rancho Coronado, a Ripperdocs clinic flickered weakly against the darkness. Inside, that air was thick with the scent of disinfectant and heated plastic, tinged faintly by the coppery undercurrent of blood. Machines hummed softly, their displays pulsing with vital signs and diagnostics. Rows of gleaming chrome limbs hung from racks on the walls, like strange disjointed sculptures, awaiting their turn to become part of someone's future. At a battered workbench near the back, Dr. Marco Reyes adjusted the fine settings on a new piece of cyberware. A hand slender and precise, plated with brushed titanium. He wore no gloves. His fingertips, calloused and nicked from years of work, moved with a kind of reverence over the polished surface. Marco had been a Ripperdoc for longer than he cared to count. He had seen the evolution of cyberware firsthand. From crude mechanical replacements born of necessity to the intricate near-organic augmentations that blurred the line between man and machine. On the gurney nearby, a young woman named Rena stirred, the anaesthetic slowly wearing off. Her old hand, broken in a back alley mugging, had been replaced with something stronger, faster, better. Marco watched her breathe for a moment, his own heart beating in time with the soft rhythm of the monitors. Technology in Night City was not merely a tool, it was a choice, a language, a confession whispered through metal and wire. Every augmentation told a story, of survival, of ambition, of loss. In the neon-drenched corridors of Japantown, a street samurai sprinted across rooftops, his synaptic accelerators firing bursts of raw electric speed into his limbs. To him, cyberware was freedom, a way to move faster, strike harder, live longer in a city that offered no guarantees. Far below, in the humming heart of Corpo Plaza, an executive adjusted the optical implants hidden beneath its perfect smile, cycling through layers of augmented reality, stock prices, threat analyses, encrypted memos. For him, cyberware was power, an extension of ambition, a weapon sharper than any blade. In the back rooms of illicit clubs, braindance technicians tuned their neural implants to record every sensation, every whisper of feeling, every fleeting rush of adrenaline. For them, cyberware was currency, raw experience sold and resold across the city's tangled networks. And in places few dared to tread, those abandoned by the city's fleeting mercies, cyberpsychosis loomed like a silent predator. Marco had seen it too many times. The slow unravelling of a mind overloaded by chrome. The tipping points where humanity dissolved into cold, violent instinct. A former soldier weeping as his optics cycled uncontrollably. A street kid thrashing against invisible enemies conjured by broken synapses. The city whispered promises through its chrome. Faster, smarter, stronger. But it never spoke of the cost. Marco set the titanium hand aside and wiped his forehead with the sleeve of his coat. The room smelled sharply now of coolant, and the faint burn of overtaxed circuits. Rena blinked awake, her new hand flexing hesitantly in the stale air. She stared at it, wonder and fear mingling across her face. Outside, the rain began again, a soft, endless patter against the rusted roof. Technology wrapped Night City like a second skin, tighter than any fabric, closer than any lover. It redefined life and death, rewrote the very notion of what it meant to be human. There were neural interfaces that let mercs jack directly into vehicles, feeling their engines roar like a second heartbeat. There were dermal armor grafts that turned skin to Kevlar, hiding fear beneath an illusion of invincibility. There were optical enhancements so precise they could read the flutter of a heartbeat in the dark, detect the lie in a trembling voice. And there were deeper, darker augmentations, black market relics from wars fought in secret, experimental tech designed to erase memory, to rewrite loyalty, to twist flesh into something unrecognizable. For every gleaming, corpo-approved implant polished and advertised in shining hollowboards, there was a back-alley augmentation stitched together from spare parts and desperation. Rena sat up slowly, the servo motors in her wrist whirring so softly they were almost musical. She flexed her fingers. Titanium bones beneath synthetic flesh. She was stronger now, but she was something else too. Something less. Or perhaps something more. Marco patted her shoulder gently, a rare gesture of comfort in a city that rarely offered any. Outside the clinic, the world shifted again. An executive sealed a merger with a blink of augmented vision. A street racer tuned her reflex boosters to shave seconds off a dangerous midnight run. A dying mercenary whispered a prayer into a recording shard, his last memories to be sold to the highest bidder. And through it all, the cybernetic pulse of Night City thrummed. Cold, relentless, beautiful. Technology here was not separate from life. It was life. It was the bright, burning engine that powered ambition. It was the quiet poison that hollowed souls. It was salvation, damnation, rebirth and ruin, offered in a single gleaming package, priced just out of reach. In the end, it did not matter who you were before the chrome. The city would remake you. It always did. And so, as the gears of chrome and code turned ceaselessly within the city's bones, life in Night City unfolds in 1,000 tiny stories. A restless dance through alleys, towers, markets, and dreams. Let us drift now through a single day and night in this city that never truly sleeps. The first light of morning came not from the sun, but from the city itself. A restless artificial glow that pushed back the darkness with flickering billboards and humming street lamps. Night City never truly slept. It simply shifted from the dangers of the night to the weary churn of another day. In the cramped kitchen of a tiny Hayward apartment, Carmen Reyes cracked an egg into a battered skillet, the smell of frying oil filling the small tiled space. The fan overhead rattled faintly as it tried and failed to pull the heat out of the room. Carmen moved slowly, methodically. She had an hour before her shift started at the local data farm. Enough time to eat, dress, and maybe, if the city was kind, avoid getting caught in traffic gridlock. The apartment around her was a patchwork of salvaged life. A couch rescued from a junkyard, a table whose legs didn't quite match, a cracked hollow frame flickering with a frozen image of a younger, laughing woman, herself once, before Night City wore away the shine. Down on the street, vendors already shouted over each other, hawking breakfast burritos, soy paste noodles, and hot cups of sludge-thick coffee. Delivery drones buzzed through the air, weaving between crumbling buildings and glittering ad blimps drifting lazily above. The smell of the street was dense, a warm, chaotic mix of food, oil, ozone, and sweat. Somewhere nearby, a news ticker on a holographic ad board scrolled endless updates about market crashes, gang violence, and celebrity scandals. No one really read it anymore. Carmen grabbed her bag, slipped into the flow of foot traffic, and let the city carry her forward. Across town, in the fortified towers of Corpo Plaza, the morning looked different. Elias Trent adjusted his tie one more time in the polished chrome of the elevator wall, the overhead lights glinting off his neural port. His implant fed him updates as he descended to the lobby. Meeting requests, profit projections, minor security alerts flagged for someone else to deal with. The air here was cool, sterile, filled with the faint scent of synthesized lavender and ozone scrubbers working overtime. Every movement was efficient, every smile practiced. In this part of Night City, the chaos was hidden beneath glass and marble, buried under layers of security and protocol. As Elias stepped into the lobby, his optics scanned the crowd automatically. Threat assessments, emotional tells, probability calculations flashing subtly across his vision. It was instinct now, as natural as breathing. Outside the corporate walls, the city throbbed with a different rhythm. In Watson's tangled maze of markets and side streets, a young boy named Mateo Alvarez wove through crowds with the quick darting movements of someone born to the streets. His bag rattled softly with stolen tech scraps, bits of cyberware, cracked data shards, anything that might fetch a few eddies at the junk markets later. The air was hotter here, thicker, tinged with the ever-present buzz of malfunctioning neon and the metallic tang of overworked generators. Street musicians played broken songs on patched-together instruments, their music battling the roar of engines and the crackle of street hawkers advertising wares of questionable legality. Mateo didn't notice the chaos anymore. It was simply the air he breathed, the ground he ran across, the noise that tucked him in at night. Up in Westbrook, Japantown's synthetic sakura trees shed their plastic blossoms into the afternoon breeze, carried along wide boulevards lined with noodle stands and capsule hotels. A woman in a glittering dress leaned over the railing of a rooftop bar, sipping a cocktail that cost more than a month's rent in the outer districts. Below her, a steady river of tourists flowed past street performers, neon-lit theatres, and endless rows of pachinko parlours promising quick riches. The scent of frying tempura and cheap cologne mixed with the crispness of refrigerated air pumping from storefronts. Deals were made here, small, personal ones, between tourists and vendors, between dreamers and liars, between the city and the people foolish enough to think they might leave unmarked. Farther south, in the industrial sprawl of Santo Domingo, the heat radiated from the asphalt itself, rising in shimmering waves. In a fenced yard behind a power substation, Raul Vega adjusted the settings on a row of transformers, his face slick with sweat despite the early hour. The roar of turbines thudded through the ground, a deep, bone-rattling pulse that made conversation impossible. Work here was endless. Repairs patched over yesterday's failures, while tomorrow's breakdowns loomed inevitable. Raoul didn't complain. He didn't have time to. The smell of scorched metal and burnt wiring hung heavy in the air. Beyond the chain-link fences, tanker trucks rumbled along cracked roads, carrying fuel, water, or waste. It hardly mattered which. Life in Santo Domingo wasn't about thriving. It was about enduring. As evening crept back across the city, lights blinked awake one by one, some elegant and orchestrated in Corpo Plaza, others sputtering and flickering in the chaotic veins of Watson and Pacifica. In Hayward, a birthday party spilled out into the street, music thumping from old speakers, the laughter of children mingling with the occasional crack of distant gunfire. In Night City, you celebrated when you could, even if only for a moment. In Pacifica's hollow towers, fires flickered in old oil drums, illuminating the graffiti-stained walls with a warm, uncertain glow. A group of voodoo boys gathered around a judiciary-rigged terminal, laughing softly at some hidden message threaded through the ghostly remains of the old nets. Out in the Badlands, the Aldecaldos set up camp under a blood-red sunset, their trucks circling like protective beasts, their fires small points of defiance against the growing dark. And back in the heart of it all, Carmen Reyes waited at a crowded bus stop, the day's exhaustion etched into her bones. The bus was late, as always. A gunfight down the block, maybe. Or maybe just the city itself, shrugging its shoulders at the needs of its people. Around her, other workers slumped against battered concrete benches, their faces a college of weariness, boredom, and quiet, stubborn endurance. The air smelled of fried soy, old rubber, and the soft, static charge of a coming rainstorm. Carmen closed her eyes for a moment, letting the city's noise wash over her, heavy and constant and strangely comforting. Because this was life in Night City, not the blood-soaked headlines, not the whispered legends of mercs and netrunners, but the small, stubborn rituals of survival, the meals cooked, the debts paid, the laughter snatched in alleyways, the long rides home through broken streets, 1,000 tiny victories, fought and won each day against a city that never stopped asking for more. Night City did not love its people, but it carried them forward, night after night, heartbeat after heartbeat. And as the stars flickered fitfully behind the veil of neon and pollution, another day ended. Not with a grand finale, but with a quiet, persistent promise. Tomorrow, it begins again. And beneath these endless rhythms of survival and ambition, deeper questions linger. Quiet, insistent echoes in the spaces between the city's heartbeat. What does it mean to be human when your body and mind are no longer wholly your own? Where does the soul reside when memory can be bought, sold, and stolen? Let us drift now into these quieter currents, where the philosophy of Night City unfolds. Night settled deeper over the city, blurring the hard lines of concrete and steel into softer silhouettes under flickering neon halos. Above the rooftops, heavy clouds crawled across the sky, low and heavy, holding back what little starlight might have pierced the city's synthetic glow. In a narrow apartment tucked high above Watson's oldest blocks, a netrunner named Theo sat cross-legged before an ancient terminal, the hum of the machine barely louder than his slow, steady breathing. On the screen, lines of code danced and flickered. Living threads spun from data and dreams. Theo's fingers hovered above the interface, not yet moving, as his mind wandered somewhere farther than the net could reach. The question was simple, in theory. What did it mean to be real, when your thoughts could be digitized, when your memories could be overwritten or stolen? The air in the room was stale, tinged with the faint, acrid smell of overheated circuits and the slow decay of neglected wiring. A single cracked window let in the faintest breeze, heavy with the city's metallic breath. Theo closed his eyes. In Night City, humanity was not a fixed thing. It shifted, twisted, adapted. A street kid with optical implants could see better than a hawk. A corpo agent with a fortified nervous system could react faster than any natural reflex. A rock boy with a reinforced larynx could command crowds like ancient emperors. When so much could be replaced, limbs, lungs, thoughts, where did the original self end and the machine begin? He thought of the old stories. Long before Night City rose from the ashes of a dying world, people had asked themselves similar questions about souls, about consciousness, about what lingered after flesh failed. Now, in these glittering streets and rusted alleys, the question was no longer theoretical. It was survival. Down in the ruins of Pacifica, a woman named Elise wandered the crumbling halls of a forgotten mall. Her implants flickered weakly, a low battery warning pulsing at the edge of her vision. Ignored. Each step echoed in the hollow vastness, the sound swallowed quickly by the hanging remnants of forgotten advertisements and shattered storefronts. She had once been someone, a netrunner of some repute, perhaps, or maybe just a drifter with talent enough to earn a name for a while. Now, with failing augmentations and memories riddled with gaps like moth-eaten cloth, she was something else. Not fully who she had been, not yet fully someone new. Elise paused before a broken mirror. Her reflection splintered into 1,000 versions of herself. Metal gleamed where skin should have been. Her own eyes, once brown and warm, now cold synthetic replacements, stared back without blinking. Was she still herself, or just a collection of borrowed parts, stitched together by necessity and chance? The city offered no answers, only more questions, and 1,000 ways to drown them out. Back in city centre, high above the churning streets, a corporate psychologist presented a report to a room full of sleek-suited executives. The data was clear. Higher rates of cyberpsychosis correlated strongly with excessive, unchecked augmentation, especially among lower-income demographics. The solution, they suggested, was not regulation or care, but containment, more security, more surveillance, better insurance packages, tailored to predict collapse before it became inconvenient. In the pristine chill of that boardroom, humanity was a metric, a liability to be managed, a variable in the profit equations scrawled across virtual whiteboards. Outside, in the city's endless streets, the human cost was paid daily, in blood, in lost memories, in the quiet shattering of fragile minds stretched too far. The question lingered, heavy and unanswered. Were these people losing themselves because of the technology? Or because of the city that demanded so much from them and offered so little in return? At a street corner in Haywood, a preacher with rusted cybernetic arms shouted sermons to passing crowds, his voice raw and cracking through an old amplifier. He spoke not of gods or saviours, but of the soul, the invisible thread, he said, that no implant, no augmentation, no corporate algorithm could ever truly erase. Some paused to listen, eyes wary and curious. Most hurried past, too tired, too jaded, too busy chasing tomorrow's survival. And yet, the preacher continued, undeterred. In a city where everything was for sale, he claimed there were still things that could not be bought or stolen. Hope, memory, choice. In a dim corner of a dive bar near the border of Santo Domingo, a man in a battered leather jacket nursed a drink and stared into the cracked surface of the bar top. His hand, a sleek, high-end cybernetic model, far too expensive for a place like this, flexed unconsciously as he thought. He had once fought wars for a megacorp that promised him glory, purpose, a legacy carved into the bones of history. Now, his name was forgotten even by the databases that had once profiled his every breath. All he had left were fragments, flashes of faces, the recoil of gunfire, the hollow weight of medals that no longer existed. He wondered idly if the man who had signed those contracts had died somewhere along the way, quietly, without notice, leaving only this machine to wander the ruins. Night City did not mourn the lost. It built over them, painted new lines on old scars, sold new dreams stitched from old nightmares. And still, amid the endless cycle of erosion and reconstruction, small, stubborn sparks flared. A street artist spray-painted defiant murals across Corpo's security walls, their colours vivid against the city's tired greys. A nurse in a back alley clinic stitched together the wounded with trembling hands and quiet prayers, even knowing some would not live to see another sunrise. A hacker slipped forgotten memories into public channels, leaking moments of laughter, sorrow, and love into the cold machinery of the net. In a city that demanded pieces of yourself in exchange for every step forward, choosing to remember, to hope, to care, even when it hurt, was its own kind of rebellion. Theo opened his eyes. The terminal before him still pulsed with silent potential, waiting for instructions. He reached out, fingertips brushing the surface, and the screen blossomed into life. Maybe humanity wasn't something you could lose by swapping a hand or an eye or even half your mind. Maybe it lived somewhere deeper, in the choices you made, in the moments you refused to surrender, in the memories you carried forward, even when everything else was stripped away. The city around him breathed and shifted, endless and uncaring. But somewhere, faint beneath the neon and chrome, a different rhythm pulsed. A heartbeat, still human, still alive. And so, as Night City sprawls into the endless dark, stitched together by chrome and hope, ruin and resilience, we find ourselves standing quietly at the threshold, watching as 1,000 tiny lives flicker like stars behind heavy clouds. Let us end with one final glimpse, a quiet farewell to a city that endures. The city was quieter now, not silent, never truly silent, but the kind of quiet that settled just before dawn, when the streetlights blinked uncertainly against the creeping edge of morning, and the air felt thick with the breath of things left unsaid. Down by the river, where the forgotten canals cut deep scars between crumbling industrial blocks, an old man named Vincent sat on a folding chair, fishing line dangling lazily into the black water. The rod wasn't likely to catch anything. The river had long since surrendered to toxins and silt, and whatever lived beneath its surface was better left undisturbed. But Vincent wasn't here to fish. He was here to listen. The water lapped softly against the stained concrete banks. Far above, a lone maglev train whispered across its track, the windows glowing like a string of tired stars. Somewhere deeper in the city, a siren cried once, then fell silent, swallowed by distance. The air was cool, damp with the lingering memory of rain, and carried the faint, bittersweet scent of rust and wet earth. A rare, almost forgotten smell, amid the ozone and grease that usually clung to Night City's breath. Vincent leaned back, the old chair creaking under his weight, and watched the lights ripple across the water. This was Night City, stripped of its noise, its bluster, its endless parade of survival. A place built from the broken ambitions of another age. A place where every wall, every shard of glass, every faded mural carried the weight of 1,000 stories. Stories of people who fought, who dreamed, who failed, who endured. And somehow, beneath the chrome plating, the synthetic skin, the data streams, and endless transactions, something stubbornly human remained. It lived in the way Matteo darted through Watson's crowded markets, in the quiet steadiness of Carmen's morning rituals, in the fierce loyalty Panam carried across the desert winds, in the stubborn spark that flickered behind Judy's tired eyes, in the defiant songs Silverhand's ghost still screamed into the void, in every broken thing that refused to stay broken. Night City did not offer safety. It did not offer mercy. It offered the chance, slim, fleeting, to carve out a space in its endless sprawl, to leave a mark, to be remembered, even for a heartbeat longer than the city itself. Vincent pulled the empty line from the water, smiling softly at the futility of it, and packed his chair under his arm. Behind him, the horizon was beginning to change. A faint, aching wash of pale gold stretching across the edge of the world, brushing against the towers, bleeding into the soot-stained sky. The day would come soon enough, roaring back into life with the grind of engines and the neon flash of dreams bought and sold. But for now, in this fragile, suspended moment, Night City rested, breathing, remembering, waiting.